Good evening. This should be a relatively simple task.
Just the idea of a vampire bunny.
Let's take people's normal lives and really fuck that up.
Demon possession is enthralling.
Yeah. Hey, Book Dragons. It is another episode of the Spine Bookcast, Chronicles of a Bookshop with your girl, Lindsay, from the Spine Bookshop here in Smyrna, Tennessee. Today we have a really cool author, Pierre Roustan, who's a horror author. He's written The Cane Letters, Chimera Falls, and Malamunis, which is
Good
a
job.
trilogy. Did I get it right?
You got it right.
Yay. All right, awesome. Well,
That was perfect.
thank you for coming
That
to
was
the
perfect.
podcast. I'm so glad to have you. So let's just kind of get into it. How did you get into reading?
How did I get into reading? Ooh,
Yes,
now we're going like all the way back, when I was a kid.
yes,
Actually, it just came up to me, like in a previous live. But as far as like the horror genre, but I was always a reader. I read a lot of books at like the age of like 6 or 7 or even 8, and then it just like snowballed. But in particular for the horror genre, I started reading a book that my parents got me, and I'm willing to bet some people probably don't even remember it or even know about it. But it was a book called Bunnicula, and it was
oh
for
my God, I
kids.
have that book series. I had the whole series.
Yeah. I read that book and I fell in love.
Oh,
Just the idea of a vampire bunny, escaping the cage and then sucking all the juice out of the veggies. Just the
yes,
way it was written was so endearing, and it was a it was the right amount of spook. And I even read R.L. Stein too as well. I also got the next 2 books in the series. I just can't remember what they were. I think it was like The Haunting of Howl Inn or something like
yeah.
that. And then there
Haunting of
was
Helen, and I can't remember what the third one is. I remember reading those when I was little too.
Yep, I fell in love. I completely fell in love, but as you know, it's almost like a gateway. You
Yes.
know, like now I'm like, wanting anything, that's horror or spooky. But
Mhm.
at that age, you kind of into it, and you took it in stride. I wasn't like reading, Splatterpunk at the age of 10, but
Sure.
but it felt like it was close to it. And so I started getting into all the classics, like Bram Stoker's Dracula and Mary Shelley's
Sure.
Frankenstein, and The Wolf Man, and
Have you
all of
seen
that.
the trailer?
I was very much
Sorry
the
to
what?
interrupt you. Have you seen the trailer for the new Frankenstein, Guillermo del Toro's?
There's a trailer now out. Okay, I gotta
Yes,
see
I
it.
saw it this morning.
Okay,
Holy
sweet. All
crap.
right, it's good.
Oh my God. I got goosebumps.
Okay. Well, what am I asking if it's good or not? It's Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah,
Like,
he could direct a
oh
phone
my
and it
God.
would be amazing.
He's like one of the masterminds of horror himself.
Yes,
Like I'm
yes,
not surprised. Okay, after we're done with this, I have to watch the trailer then.
yes.
So cool, so cool. But yeah, no, watching like now Frankenstein, and I even Mel Brooks, he did some, kind of work, on the horror side of things too,
Sure.
but there was kind of that comedy edge to it, and made it a little bit easier,
Yeah,
as a kid to really dive into it, and I didn't get
sure.
scared. I ended up, I guess, developing, a resistance to fear and just enjoyed, the horror genre. Like I could walk through a haunted house and, not even get scared.
I don't think
So,
mine
I became
was
enamored with it.
well, I don't think mine was necessarily a resistance to fear. I think mine was more a different things scared me. Do you know what I mean? Like the Freddy
Yes.
Kruegers and the Jasons, that the jump scares. That's easy. That's cheap scare. The stuff that freaks me out is like the Hannibal Lecter kind of stuff.
Oh God, yes.
That
Oh my God, yeah.
it's based on true stories.
Right. I did get into the Freddy Kruegers, and the Friday, the 13th,
Yeah,
all that stuff.
yeah, for
But
sure.
as I got older, I really worked myself into it because, sometimes I kind of had to sneak. like mom and dad, like, oh my God, he doesn't want, like this 10-year-old, watching this kind of stuff, but I would kind of sneak and watch that stuff, and I got kind of used to it. I started reading literature that was very much the same. Like I read John Steakley's Vampires, which was
Yeah.
the book
Oh,
was
good.
adapted into film by with James Wood as Jack Crow. And that's kind of where, the whole, fascination with vampirism started
Sure.
was with that,
Sure.
and then Bram Stoker's Dracula and all that.
Oh God. Okay, so I because you like horror movies, I'm going to ask you about this because I don't know if many people have ever actually seen it. But do you remember the movie The Serpent and the Rainbow back in 1988?
I do remember, hearing that title. I don't know if I watched it, but
It
that sounds
messed
very,
me
very
up
familiar.
so bad. It's got Bill Pullman in it, and it is a phenomenal, phenomenal. Oh God. It's back. The premise is that there's political unrest in Haiti, and so anthropologist Dennis Allen he goes down there to study the voodoo drug that's used in religious practices to turn victims into living zombies, right? And so,
Oh God, that's
yeah,
harsh.
yes. Well, there's a witch doctor and a fellow researcher, and oh my God. Oh God, it gave me the heebie-jeebies. And it's still one of the best horror movies I've ever seen in my entire life. It freaked me right the fuck out.
Yeah, and that's not to say that, I had a full-on resistance to fear. I think, it's probably not the right word to use, but it's this desire for fear.
Sure,
Like I wanted to be scared. Um,
sure,
and it grew, the desire for it grew more and more, but so did, my threshold, you know.
sure,
Once you get to
sure,
the point where you have to turn it off or close your eyes, that's where you're past the threshold. But my threshold was very, very high. Like I could, watch things or read things without flipping out or freaking out. But once I get so close to that edge, I know I'm in the sweet spot. And I know like I'm right on that edge where like all the emotions are supercharged and it's just exciting. And yeah, it is kind of like a drug, you
it is
know.
a little bit.
But that's, as far as reading, goes.
Do you have a favorite book that is like your go-to horror novel that's like one of your favorites?
Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah, why? If you don't mind me
Yeah,
asking.
hands down.
I mean, I know why it's one of mine's, but why is it one of yours?
I don't know specifically. I think it's just a lot of my experience as a kid. I kind of tie into, experiences that I had as a kid reading the book. Because there's one that, is very, very dear to me. Like I have two siblings. I have a brother who's a year younger than me, and I have a sister who's 10 years older than me. And she was in college, I believe. She came to visit and she wanted to hang out with the two of us. She absolutely loved us. She was like a second mother to us. And we were in our room. My brother and I were sharing a room. We were like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old, and she was like 18.
Mm,
So she had just gone to college. She came home and she wanted to hang out. And I think I brought up something about, wanting her to read to us, but I want her to read something scary. I want her to read something spooky or whatever. So I had this, I want to say it was a shortened version of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
okay,
Um, it wasn't like the full on, manuscript, but it was one that's more digestible for kids.
okay,
But in this case, it was just more digestible in terms of her reading it out loud. Because
okay,
we'd be there for like, I don't know, a few hours or whatever.
sure,
So she was able to read it literally like in a couple hours.
okay,
And I remember vividly her sitting there on the bed just reading Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I was mesmerized. And we had the lights off and everything like that.
sure,
And my brother, wasn't saying a word because he gets just a tad bit scared more than me,
uh-huh,
over the things like that. But it was just hilarious because like we're just these little kids, and we're listening to this story about vampires and stuff like that. But I tie that into just the love for the book, and then I read the actual book, and then
Uh,
I watched films like, Francis Ford Coppola's, Bram Stoker's Dracula,
oh,
his
good.
rendition of it, and I absolutely fell in love. And of course, I love Bela Lugosi,
Yeah, who
like
doesn't?
those classics. Just and so like and when you go right back to the book, the source is Stoker.
Yeah, of course.
I have to say that that is my favorite book, because of all the branches that, came from that one book
Sure.
is just mesmerizing. Like all the different versions of Dracula, it's all because of him,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely.
So yeah, that's why Stoker is my favorite.
No, I get that. Do you have a favorite television or movie version? I mean, besides Bram Stoker's, because that's like the pinnacle. But do you have like another one
Mhm.
that's like a favorite movie version or television version of Dracula?
Let's see. Yeah, there is another one. I have to, I love all of them. I
Sure,
love all of them. All the TV versions too. Like there were
sure,
so many of them, like
right?
Moonlight. There was another campy kids show called Dracula, and I watched that avidly. I was so sad when they got canceled. Kid you not, I was like, was just horrified. I'm like, why did they cancel my show? But film that I have to call out that actually inspired the Kane letters quite a bit, and it was Dracula 2000,
I
which,
remember that.
there was some camp to it. Yeah, Gerard Butler played Vlad, Tepes
Yep,
himself. Except the twist at the end was absolutely stunningly ingenious. Like it was fantastic. It was a great film, honestly. It was a great film. I mean, it wasn't gonna win an Oscar or anything like that, but
sure,
Gerard Butler was just like insane. He was
sure,
like so cool. And he was a great version, of the historical, vampire damned himself. That it spawned me, among several other inspirations, to write the Kane letters. So, like, out of all of them, I have to pick that one as my, second, like, one that, was just fantastic for like
sure.
vampirism in general.
Talk to me about the Kane letters. So you've written three books. The Kane letters, Chimera Falls, and Malamunis. So talk to me about those books. What are they?
Okay. They are paranormal vampire horror action thrillers.
Okay.
Uh, Definitely edged with suspense, psychological horror, but also religious horror.
Okay.
I often pull and, characterize it as, like you got Blade meets Underworld meets The Exorcist meets Indiana Jones meets The Matrix meets Da Vinci Code. So like yeah, there's a lot of call out to scripture, a lot of Old
Sure.
Testament apocalyptic, stuff that, comes out because, from watching, Dracula 2000, you can kind of imagine. I did a lot of research
Sure.
and I also read a smattering of Elizabeth Kostova's The Historian, which
I've
was
read
a
that.
lovely take. Yeah, that was a lovely take on Vlad Dracula. I became just like a nut, for like researching the history of Vlad Tepes. Fun fact though, the Cane Letters isn't even about Vlad Tepes. I, took from, scripture, what would be the father of the damned, but obviously would inspire, all these stories like Vlad Tepes, Dracula, and Nosferatu and all of that.
Sure.
And I kind of ran with it from like a biblical source instead. But it was from like researching, Cain and Abel, researching the demon Lilith, the first wife of Adam that I saw something rich, in the mythology that could turn into quite the tale.
Sure.
And I built it out from the book,
Okay.
where it's about a band of hunters that were born out of, the great warrior Nimrod who hunted, all sorts of evil things, all,
Okay.
all sorts of evil beasts, and that included vampires, of course.
Sure.
which, I strongly believed way back when, like they were like the denizens of hell. We see them in cultures all over the world. So like they exist at least, mythologically and supernaturally everywhere. So I took that and I ran with it, and it's a story about the that same tribe of hunters, but they've grown and evolved, to modern times, and they are professional assassins. They are hunters, they are executioners, they are like the policemen of the supernatural world, because they hunt evil, but not the people that have been tainted by that evil. Because ultimately vampires were once human.
Sure.
There's this element of respect that
Sure.
they have. But they will go after, anyone who turns rogue. They will go after anyone who, tries to taint mankind in any sort of way.
Sure.
So that's their purpose. The Vatican reaches out to my FMC, who is she's got a nasty chip on her shoulder because let's just say she hates vampires for a reason, and I will not say why.
We don't want to spoil it.
And she will, yeah, I don't want to spoil anything. But she's just an angry soul. She is an angry soul to the point, you've heard this kind of trope before that, things you hunt, you end up being yourself, and
Yeah.
she treads that line very, very closely.
Okay.
Where she will, go right into the darkness or right into the shadows really easily.
Okay.
The Vatican approaches her and her team to start staking out this one particular master vampire of the Russian Council. He's a Russian, and
Okay.
he's apparently looking for this infernal manuscript from
Okay.
history, way back when. And it is essentially like the Bible of the vampire nation that they never had. It got lost over time,
Okay.
very much like the Dead Sea Scrolls, they had lost forever and then was recently discovered back in like
Right. Right.
1940.
Okay.
So the Vatican got wind of this. All vampires, if they were ever to have their hands on this manuscript, because it apparently has, a lot of the secrets that vampires essentially take over the world if they really, really wanted to.
Okay.
They currently just hide in shadows. You never see them. They may, kind of hunt you down, and you become like a familiar, all that stuff. But they want more, or at least, some do want more. And those are the ones that go rogue.
Okay.
So the Vatican is like, we need to find this manuscript. We need to find this manuscript and make sure anyone who may be rogue can't get their hands on it. So
Okay.
she's tasked with finding the manuscript. She finds out
Gotcha.
there are actually two master vampires that are going after it. It becomes very much like a cat and mouse chase,
Oh,
a
fun.
race to the end. Like, not only find the manuscript, but also recapture it because they do lose it.
Of course they do. Of course
And
they
it
do.
becomes dangerous because once and one vampire has their hand on this manuscript, no vampire ever in history has had their hand on this manuscript. That's a problem,
Okay.
for obvious
Gotcha.
reasons.
Gotcha.
So it becomes a very much a race to the end. It is a thrill ride. There are horror elements to it as well, but it ends with a shocker.
Oh, yay. I love
And I'll leave
shockers.
it at that.
Okay. Cool.
It
Yeah. Of
ends with a shocker that book two, becomes even worse.
course it does.
And then book three becomes even worse.
Of course it
And
does.
then there
As
will be a
it
book
should.
four.
Now, do you have a title for book four yet?
I do.
Okay. Do you want to
Would you
tell
like
us?
me
Or do you want to
to say
hold
what
it?
it is?
Yeah, why not? Go ahead.
I would not mind saying it. It's fine because the
Is it
cover
going
is
to
still
be as
kind of
hard to
under wraps.
pronounce as the third one?
Nope, you shouldn't have a problem with it, I don't think. It is two Hebrew words that are put together as well. They're kind of grafted together. It becomes very much a symbol, but it is Brithanon, the Final Covenant, is the name of the fourth book.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
And Brithanon is a combination of Berit and Hanan, and that is Hebrew for um, sacred covenant,
Okay.
sacred promise.
How
That's
did
what
you
it means.
how did you come up with the idea for this storyline?
The storyline, I kept thinking, things like National Treasure, and just the relic, and I've been an avid fan of Indiana Jones, just
Yeah,
historical relics, always exciting, like having some sort of relic that, unlocks some sort of secret of the universe or what have you.
sure.
And that just kind of popped in my head that is I wanted it to be some sort of book, some
Yeah.
sort of ancient manuscript, that has all of these secrets. And it was written by somebody who shall not be named right now.
Okay.
But if you do your research, you probably know who it is just based on the first title of the book.
Okay.
And then I just ran with it, but it turned into like this whole snowball of like now pulling from The Exorcist and demons breaking the veil, they start coming out, out into the world more than you would think, like because I think there's always kind of like this little bit of rupture because we live in a broken world. So demons can come in,
Sure.
but then they're also easy to flush out.
Yeah, yeah.
But by book two, that veil has broken all the more and they come out even more. And by book three, it's almost like an apocalypse.
Okay.
So book three gets pretty rough, and book four is like, okay, mankind is over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mankind is over. This is rough. This is very rough. Book four is going to be like a natural disaster film meets psychological horror
Sure.
meets, your classic vampire action, thriller meets it's just a wide variety of tropes that are super interwoven and succinctly tied in this wonderful nightmare bow, and it ends just beautifully. Like when I finish writing the actual draft, I'll probably be shedding tears
Oh,
because it will be
really?
the end of a legacy for me that started back in 2009.
So there's only going to be four books in this series.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. Oh, I love that.
Correct.
I love
Now,
that.
you never know if I may explore it, later on, which I might actually.
Yeah,
I might actually explore it, from a prequel side of things
sure.
because there's a lot of history there. The Berit Lokem, which is the Divine Covenant, they are the band of warriors. They're also known as the Warriors of the Three Trinity Lines. Like I said, they hail from way back. They hail from Nimrod. If you were to open up the book of Genesis, they are the warriors that hunt, evil things.
Right,
And throughout the entire, Old Testament and the New Testament, you see them. They may even be lines, within the Israelite zealots, like Simon, who was the zealot, one of the apostles. They are, assassins. They are assassins. And
yeah,
so there's that lineage that also exists within them too, So like
sure.
there's a rich storyline, at least, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 different storylines,
Right.
based on these hunters that I could write. Anything from the medieval times even, 1940s. They've been around and there are factions all over the world. In fact, book two, there will be a team from Australia that, will enter into, the fray of the storyline as well. And I love that team, especially close to my heart because as a kid, I visited Australia
Oh, you did? I've
and I
always
enjoyed
wanted to
it there.
go
It
to
was
Australia.
beautiful. Yeah, I even swam in the Great Barrier Reef and was in the
Uh,
outback. Yeah. And so I called out a lot of my experiences to this team that, they were born out of Australia and they have the same mark,
sure.
so like, and they know of all other factions around the world who hunt, evil things. And this team from Australia also does. And they were, staking out, um, one of their team members got captured. And
Okay,
so they went to Russia, and it was from Russia that, that team member got captured.
sure.
But this is, an element in book two, and I won't say any more of that.
Sure.
But there are about 4 or 5 members on the team that, have now grown close to me in my heart that like this is pulled from my experience that they are Aussies. One of them is an Aborigine. One of them is actually Irish, but she
Okay.
works with the team that, serves, the higher cause, in Australia.
Sure.
And they meet up with Alexandra, who is my FMC, and they just, go to Pound Town with these vampires.
What do you think our society's obsession with vampires is? Like, where do you think that comes from?
That is an awesome question. I wonder, like, honestly, it makes me that the mysticism behind them comes from the fact that, everyone is terrified of death.
Yeah.
Everyone since the beginning of time has been terrified of death. And oftentimes I really think evil tries to twist it or take it, and try to manipulate mankind into thinking there's a way to avoid it.
Okay.
And that's where it comes, where this it's about being immortal. It's about, trying to, the blood is the life, as like Vlad said, in Francis Ford Coppola's version, the blood is the life. And
Sure.
it even twists the meaning behind, Jesus, drink my blood, do this in remembrance of me. They take that idea and they twist it and they make it something more seductive than it actually is.
Yeah.
Um, on the other side of it, there's this fear that you then become, a part of it, and you're terrified of that. You're terrified of the idea of being immortal. You're terrified of having this eternal hunger. And so it's almost like, it's a scary story. Like
Sure.
I think people like to tell those stories, like a cautionary tale. Don't let anybody in who's a stranger, you
Uh-huh.
know. Don't let anybody in who could be evil. And that's where that trope comes from. Like if you I'll invite a vampire in, they can come in. If you don't, they can't come in.
Right.
Like they actually cannot enter your house. And that's a fun trope too to deal with the vampire mythology. Like they can always just be outside your house, but they can never come in. But if you invite them in, you're screwed.
Right.
And but they're seductive too. So they'll entice you. They may even manipulate your mind. They can, give you images that, make you want to, fall in love with them. It's very, very enticing. And a lot of that, comes from the European image, what the vampire is. Thank you, Anne Rice. You are a lovely, lovely lady. And when you invite them in, they take you over.
Yeah.
It's this pleasure or this seduction of being completely consumed by darkness.
Yeah.
And those stories are just mesmerizing. I think that's, how it all came about. Stemming just from the very beginning is, this idea of wanting to be immortal, wanting to avoid death,
Okay.
you know.
Gotcha. Do you what so do you have a favorite boogeyman slash genre of horror that isn't vampires?
Um I really did have a thing for Freddy Krueger because I thought that was such a lovely idea. Someone who enters your nightmares
Yeah.
and tries to control you in your nightmares. I fell in love with that kind of trope too. I mean, yeah, it was campy, and so was Friday the 13th, but that's just part of the horror genre, and you ate it up. You just loved it. The idea that someone's stalking you either, in real life or in your dreams.
Yeah.
So it was kind of twofold for me. I really, really loved Freddy and I really, really loved Jason. And honestly, I really, really loved Michael Myers. Like he is just, it was terrifying seeing, that figure, an imposing figure, who's very much like the boogeyman. In fact, Laurie Strode, called him the boogeyman.
Yeah.
He will just stalk you and he doesn't say a word and he's not going to stop. It's
Yeah.
like the original Terminator. He
Oh,
was the Terminator. He was just not a cyborg.
yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Do you have so and sometimes in movies and books, horror not only takes on the monster thing, but it also takes on this idea of science in horror. Do you like how do you think science fiction works into horror for you? Do you have like a genre of science fiction horror that you like?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm trying to think of one particular science fiction book, I guess that, I read that, had this element of horror. One time I think I read an aliens book It was adapted, by the films, and it was um, a book adaptation of, the Aliens franchise. But it
Yeah.
was a unique. The way it was written was foreboding,
Okay.
gruesome, hard-boiled,
Yeah.
slow burn. There's something about steel, the emptiness of space,
Yeah.
that amplifies horror in horrifying ways.
Yeah.
When you realize, that, Ripley was all by herself in that spaceship with an alien that could just, completely, rip you from limb to limb, and there's nowhere for you to go.
Yeah.
You're stuck in that spaceship in the middle of a vacuum. When you think about it in that way, that's horrifying. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
And you get out, you know, and that's the start of it. That's, science fiction often does include space,
Right.
but it's not so much about space as it is, the scenarios you end up in, when it comes to science fiction is you're completely disconnected from community. You're disconnected from society. You're like in the open, because in science fiction you have to travel. You're on adventures. You're going off into space. You're, visiting new worlds. You're doing the whole Star Trek thing. You
Yeah.
know, because of that, you're now alone. You're completely alone. You're not in your home base.
Yeah.
And this even applies, when it's reversed. Like, the aliens come to you and they take you from planet Earth, or, like, you don't even have to be taken from planet Earth. They just come to you and they either infect your planet, or they twist your planet in some sort of way, or they monopolize your planet. Like, films like A Quiet Place.
Oh God,
You
that
know,
movie messed me up so bad.
like, things like that is just terrifying. Think about that. That's a science fiction film, but it's a horror film.
Yeah. Oh, it totally is.
Like that concept blew me away. It's the idea of taking humanity and ripping it to shreds, and all that's left are just remnants. That's science fiction horror to me. I watched Event Horizon, and
Oh,
I was like,
such a
that's
good
a
movie.
haunted house. That's a haunted house, but in a spaceship. So, so the element is there. I have yet to have an idea, in my head for something that's in science fiction horror, but that's common.
Yeah.
That's common. Um, I'm
Have you
trying to
ever
think of any projects that I have that are like that, but not quite yet. But I'm gonna have one. I swear to God, I'm gonna have one.
have you ever read the book Feed? It's a young adult
Feed?
novel and it's a dystopian novel. And I will tell you, out of everything I've ever read, that thing, holy crap, that book messed me up so bad because it's about a future society where everybody has a chip implanted in the back of their neck. And so, you know how,
Yeah.
like, we do everything online, we talk online, we do videos, we watch, we shop online, all that kind of stuff, right? Well, imagine doing all of that, but with a chip in the back of your neck.
I know that is kind of frightening.
Okay. Well, in the
I have
book,
not read it, but that would be one that I would pull to read.
it's so good. It's a quick read.
Because you see, the trope is very real. Science
Oh,
fiction
yeah.
horror is definitely all about
Oh, yeah, yeah.
messing with humanity in some sort of way,
Well, and the
because
thing
that's
about
literally
it
all
that's
it's about.
freaky is that some people still refuse to get the chip because it's totally voluntary. Volun
Oh, it's
Voluntary.
voluntary?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I
So, but
see.
the problem is that some people that do get the chip, their body doesn't accept it very well, so it starts to rust and corrode them from the inside out. And
Holy crap.
yeah,
Okay.
and so it just it's about the main character is a guy and he's like the popular kid and he falls in love with this girl who doesn't have the chip. He convinces her to get it, and of course the inevitable happens. But the decline of her because of this chip is the most horrific thing that I have ever read in my entire life, and it freaked me out
Oh,
so
that sounds so
bad.
cool. That sounds so cool. That's pulling from like all those other kinds of tropes too, like
Yeah,
and it's not always science fiction horror. It's not always science fiction, but when there's a metamorphosis or a
yeah,
transformation.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I watched The Fly. with Jeff
Oh my
Goldblum.
God.
And let me tell you, like getting closer to that threshold, of
Yes.
like, holy shit, what am I watching?
Yes.
You know,
I remember watching that as a little
it
girl
was
going freaked
beautiful.
right out.
Absolutely freaking beautiful to watch this occur in real time,
Oh,
and it's oh my God.
Jeff
That
Goldblum is
I even forgot to
absolutely
mention.
masterful in that movie.
I even forgot to mention The Fly. Like, I mean, the Fly, The Blob.
Wait.
There
The
was another
Blob
one
with
called
Steve McQueen, like the old school one.
the old school one.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay, good.
The Blob. Um, there was one called The Stuff.
Yes, I remember the stuff. The Tinkler with
The
Vincent Price
Stuff.
is freaky too.
Yes, it's just, oh God, watching that just, horrified me, but in such a great way. And of course, it was a little campy too, but
Of course.
like things like that, that, change you or, metamorphose you in some sort of sick, sadistic, unbelievably just gross kind of way, it was just mesmerizing. Like, but again, that pulls from that trope, like we're messing with humanity. We're
Mhm.
screwing with humanity in some way, and there's that science fiction element to it. But again, it doesn't even have to be science fiction. It could just be some sort of thing, like, The Thing with Kurt Russell,
Oh,
you
so
know,
good.
The Thing. And some of these were books too. Like,
Yeah,
I was even a big fan of, those big creature features, and I don't
sure.
think they were ever books, but it would be kind of interesting to see like a literary style for something that's like, one of those big creatures, like I'm trying to remember, but it had William Shatner in it. Um,
Is it
and
the
it was
Night of the Lepus or is it the one with the spiders?
the spiders.
Oh God, that one where the end shot is them stuck in that house and the spiders are
Yes.
over the house
And
and
it's
they're
completely covered in
trapped in
spider
there.
webs.
And then the credits roll and you're just sitting here going, what the fuck?
Like, what? Oh, jeez.
Nope.
Like it was just
Mm.
horrifying,
Yeah.
horrifying. When you end up just being horrified by what you don't see,
Yeah.
or what you don't get to see
Yep.
after the credits roll or after the book
Oh,
is done, and you're horrified by what could be at
yep.
the end of that story,
Yep.
is
Every
ultimately probably the
time.
cream of the creme of the
Oh
creme,
my
the
God.
cherry on top, the
Every
the cream in the
time.
coffee. It's just it just messes you up even more, and you close the book and you go, I'm dead.
Yeah.
It's over. It's all over. But then you're like, where's the next book?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so you had
Or
mentioned
let's go
The
see the next
Exorcist,
movie.
right? And so the scene in The
Yes, love
Exorcist
The
that
Exorcist.
gets me the most is when they show Reagan's stomach and "help me" is written on the inside of her stomach, like
Oh
backwards
yes.
or something.
Yeah.
And I just remember watching that the first time going, oh, sweet Jesus. Like, oh my God. That to me, that is
Yep.
worse than her climbing down the stairs upside down and backwards because just oh
Yes. God, it's so cool. It's so cool. Yeah, no, and that takes that same trope about, like you're twisting humanity or you're metamorphosing into something completely dark and sinister, except it's not something that's very science fiction or something that's unknown. It's
yeah,
more religious, there's a
yeah.
spiritual edge to it that, draws you because,
Religious
it reaches
horror.
into like this.
Religious
Religious horror
horror
is
is
fantastic. It
something
really is.
amazing. There is nothing quite like it.
No, there really isn't anything quite like it because you instead of, unknown or, something that's otherworldly, it's more like, an evil inside you that then grows and grows. It's already there. And that's
Oh
what,
yeah,
kind of horrifies. It's already there. It's just something sinister tapped it, and turned up the notch a little bit
yeah,
and now made you even worse and worse and worse. And then, like, really, that's what possession is, which I believe is a real thing. Like, I think
yeah.
people have been possessed or demonized, throughout history. So it is definitely real. But the fact that William Peter Blatty wrote, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's his name, William Peter Blatty.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, he wrote The Exorcist,
Yeah,
which that blows my mind. Like, there's a book called The Exorcist out there.
I have it.
I
I
have
have an
not had the
old
pleasure
school
to read his book.
1970s copy.
Lovely. I would love to actually read it because I loved The Exorcist, all three films of The Exorcist. Even the most recent one I enjoyed. I know
Yeah.
some people, really didn't care much for it, but I enjoyed it. Because it's very character driven. Like not a lot happens, in there. I mean, it's almost like watching Stephen King's Misery, except it's demons,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and you're trapped. He's trapped. It's the same idea, but to this day I call out, it's just it touches deep inside my soul, all the dark recesses there inside my mind, watching the scenes in The Exorcist 3 with I can't remember the actors, but they're in the cell there, and we see the possessed, prisoner
Mhm.
as he talks about how he kills his victims. And you see the tears rolling down his eyes, and you hear his voice deepen and rise and deepen and rise.
Mhm.
And I'm just mystified. Like, I mean, I love the original Exorcist, but Exorcist 3 took it to a completely different level. And that kind of image of demon possession is enthralling,
Yeah.
and as far as, like, yes, I love vampires, but demon possession is just something that is really terrifying. It
Well,
really, really is terrifying.
and for me, Rosemary's Baby freaked me out.
Yep, Rosemary's Baby was another
Rosemary's
like
Baby just
horrifying,
I remember
horrifying
watching that
film.
the first time, and it was, I was old enough that, I was having periods. I knew how sex happened. I knew how babies happen. So you're watching this woman do what's supposed to be natural of being a mother, and it goes so horrifically fucking wrong. And just, Jesus. Yeah. I'm never
Yeah, whoever
having
came up
sex
with that
ever.
idea, yeah, whoever author, whatever writer came up with that idea for a trope, was probably very genius because, like, I
Yeah.
mean, that awakens the fears of every mother, every female in history
Yeah.
is that you have a demon inside you,
Yeah.
you know.
Yes. And the fact that people were like making her think that she was crazy, even though they knew what was going on, and the manipulation of the people just, oh my God,
I know, it's just terrifying. When
uh,
you think about it, I mean, horror is very character driven,
yeah.
which, is sad that, throughout the years, like horror never got its due until recently, like with films like Get Out,
Oh
which
my
Jordan
God,
Peele
that's one of my favorite
mastered.
movies.
He's a master storyteller.
Yeah.
And finally we can say hats off, and tip our hats to, everything like Alfred Hitchcock and,
Oh, I
Ray
freaking
Bradbury.
love Alfred Hitchcock. It kills me because, okay, so Alfred Hitchcock, Ray Bradbury, um, uh,
Ray Bradbury,
uh,
Clive Barker,
yes, Twilight Zone. What's that guy's name? I can never remember.
Rod Serling.
Yes,
Rod
Rod
Serling is
Serling.
his name.
And I'm even throw Stephen Moffat in there with this because those writers have managed to take something very innocuous like statues or birds or
Yeah,
a
the birds,
carnival
the
and
carnival,
flip
yeah,
it on its head and make it
and make it sinister and
frightening, sinister
insidious and
thing that
just
just you
horrifying.
yeah, and you just kind of go, what? you know.
I know, it's just terrifying,
And
absolutely
I
freaking terrifying.
inadvertently look at statues now with this side eye of, no.
What an idea! Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
just,
know.
that
Like
ability to do
in
that has
for
always astounded
years, for years, these horror writers have terrified us. But, that's, all we kind of characterize them as, oh yeah, they're scary. That's what they do. Alfred Hitchcock, scares people. But we never characterize them as geniuses in the written word. We never characterized them as masterminds of the literary atmosphere, until recently,
me. Sure.
because horror never got its due. Horror
Well,
never got its due.
and I think it's more than just being scared. I think it's taking something that you're comfortable with and unnerving you to the point that you no longer trust your opinion of it.
Yeah, right. That's huge. That's quotable for you.
Yeah.
You should
It's
write that one down.
taking
Yeah.
something to go, oh, yeah, I trust it's a statue. It's no big deal. Oh, look, it's a bird. No problem. And then making it this thing that you, for the rest of your life, go, gonna go walk across the street as far away from that. It's a bird.
Yep. And you get
Yeah,
kind
but
of
is it
scared.
a
Yep.
bird or is it gonna peck my eyes out and eat me? You know?
Yeah.
And
That
that
this
ability to take that,
it exploded. You can see the call outs.
yeah.
All the classics they are now coming back because of all of these art house horror films that have
Mhm.
just like turned the horror genre into something that's, well, I want to say mainstream, but
Sure.
is is so worthwhile to watch.
I'll tell you
Like
the
Long
one
Legs
thing that
with
I think is
Nicolas Cage.
lazy, that like the lazy version, like I think it's the lazy aspect of horror is the torture porn films. I think those that where it's gross just to be gross,
Yeah,
like Hostel,
correct. Yeah.
and I think that's just lazy. You're just trying to gross us out. At this point, there's really not a story. You're just trying to be gross, and no, no shade to them, because everybody
Yeah,
has
right.
their thing. But I feel like that's lazy storytelling.
It is lazy storytelling. I wonder if it could be done, really, really well.
I think
It
the
might be
first
hard
Saw
to do.
movie did it really well, but then it got
Yeah, first
tropey
Saw
because
movie.
every single episode or movie after that got how can we gross people out more. So the first one I think
Right.
was fantastically brilliant because it was all in one room,
Yeah,
and
that's
the
right. It was
whole
all in one room.
answer to the
So
whole
you're
thing,
really focused on the characters a whole lot.
yes, and the
I
whole
think
answer to everything
it's
was in the
character
room
focused.
the whole time. But after that, it
Yep.
got very, very tropey very quickly. And it led to this whole
Very
thing
tropey.
about
Yeah, right.
how can we gross people out the most, as opposed to let's take people's normal lives and really fuck that up.
Correct. Right. I think that's like the draw, puts you in the wrong space, at least for horror. And I think that's why so many people had kind of a negative connotation to horror and
Yeah.
why you would never see it, get recognition. You never
Yeah.
see,
Yeah.
I mean, get any kind of recognition other than like, oh, that was, Alfred Hitchcock, is a tremendous mind in that space alone, so but it's not
Well, and
about writing. It's not about
I'm going to add
character. It's
Stephen
not
King to
about,
that too, because Stephen King
Stephen
made you
King. Yeah.
afraid of a car. He made you afraid of a dog.
He made him afraid of a car.
Yeah,
That's
he
right.
made you
Christine.
afraid
Yeah.
of a fan of writers. He took going to a prom
Oh God.
and made it into this fucking nightmare scenario where everything burns to the ground.
Scary. Yep.
So and like even Stephen King, like
Terrifying.
with
Yeah.
Salem's Lot, taking us back to vampires, that is one of the most fantastic books about vampires that I have ever read in my entire life. Especially like where the grave diggers get digging the grave in the very beginning, and he's talking about how he can see the kid's eyes through the coffin, and that whole.
Yes.
I had to put the book down and go watch cartoons because I was like, nope, we're done. I
I
can't go
don't
to
watch
sleep now.
cartoons.
Nope, nope. And or the kid scratching at the window of his best friend, and I'm just like, nope, nope, Luke,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
no, 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 no.
Yeah. He took that trope. He took the trope like if you invite them in, you're dead.
Yeah.
And there's that horror, to it. And King loved vampires too. I read Salem's Lot in like 2 days.
Oh
It's
God, I've read it
arguably my
so many
favorite,
times.
book from him.
Mhm.
And that also, propelled, my desire, for, the genre itself, the vampire horror genre, is definitely Salem's Lot. Like it just blew my mind, reading that book
Yeah,
because it took, kind of a modern take on, what, was we all loved about vampires, like classically,
yeah,
like
yeah.
they burned in the sunlight. You can kill them with a stake through the heart. You
Sure.
you you can kill them with holy water. Don't invite them in. They hated garlic, and
Oh
all that
yeah,
stuff.
and all that.
That's the classic stuff, and he loved that, and I loved that. Just that idea that they're almost and their hunger is voracious, and they're just going to come after you.
Have you ever seen
Um,
the movie Fright Night with Chris Sarandon?
absolutely.
Okay, so as a
Absolutely.
girl, as a
Right.
woman, watching that movie, for me, that was the first movie that the whole vampire trope of the vampire is hot and seductive. I remember, I think I was 15, and I remember looking at Christopher Sarandon and going, "Yep, I would pop a vein. Which
Papa
vein do you
Vane.
want?
Yeah.
God
See,
bless
there's that
you if you're looking in
seductiveness,
that."
Yeah, that seductiveness. I watched that, I think I was a preteen. I
Yeah,
watched that as a preteen. I was like, oh boy, where dad? I watched this, But I watched it and I have to say, I was kind of terrified, a lot of, the imagery in there was pretty frightening, especially for a 13-year-old. I look at it now and I just, get enamored. I'm like, God, that was so cool.
right?
This is so freaking campy. This is so
Yeah.
cool, because I kind of grew up with that. But I loved Fright Night too.
Oh, God. So, and
That
I
one,
hate all the
obviously,
remakes because the thing about the original movies, like The Exorcist, Fright Night, um, The Omen, the thing is that they
oh
could
God, The
not
Omen.
trade horror for being bloody and gruesome. It was horror because it was just enough to give your imagination a kick,
Yep,
and then it would move on to something
yep,
else, and your imagination is still going over here going, but
yep.
wait.
That's what I lean to the most, especially in the horror genre. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do like, some gore.
Yeah,
Um, but there's a balance,
yeah.
but you don't need it. You don't
No.
need the gore. You
Like The
really don't.
Shining. The Shining with the elevator scene where the elevator doors
God, that's
open and
fantastic.
that
Yeah.
flood of blood comes out. That was gross, but it wasn't gross in the
Stanley
shock
Kubrick.
value. It was gross in the,
Stanley Kubrick took King's vision and just
oh.
like, wow,
Well, I've actually been to the hotel, but I'm telling you right now, the minute
the
those two
hotel.
twins popped out and said, "Play with us, Danny," I would have been noped to the right the fuck out. Nope.
Yep,
Deuces. Enjoy Christmas. I'm out of here.
I'm
Of
out. No, knowing me, I'd stay. I'd stay.
course you would.
Yeah, no, I'd stay. Even if it was the Dolphin Hotel, in the room 1408. I'm sorry. Sorry, John Cusack, I'd stay.
Oh,
I
yeah.
read the short
That's
story
also a good
1408.
one.
Yeah. I read the short story 1408 and I read
Oh,
there was a bunch of other short stories Stephen King wrote. The Man in the Black Coat.
that one's good.
Yep, that one was absolutely wonderful. He wasn't too much of a fan of his own short story, but wouldn't you know it, like the short story won awards.
Oh,
So
yeah.
his lesson learned there was like, don't criticize your work too much.
Well, and
That
I
was
love
his
that
word. He
Stephen King
told
has
him like,
this really rare ability to take something very just, oh, look, it's a car. Now we're going to demonize
yeah,
it and make
and
it
it's
cute.
alive.
And you're just, what? It's what? And
Cujo,
oh God, Cujo
a dog,
is a dog, and because of
Pet
something that is
Cemetery.
naturally occurring, becomes the most
Uh-huh.
frightening thing on the fucking planet.
And then watching Pet Cemetery, is just,
Oh my
now we're trying to reach
God.
into like the mindset of people who love their animals or love their family members
Oh,
and they become something
I'm
else.
sorry. I would have missed that cat's ass and just been done with the damn thing, and I would have gone on to a
Yep.
town and gotten another animal because fuck that cat.
But you can see
Church
the
wasn't
classic
even
trope is
scary.
there.
It was the little kid with the little knife walking around.
Yep. Yep.
Oh, what news?
Because he came back different.
Mhm.
Came back wrong.
Yeah. Oh,
But you
oh,
can see the
oh.
classic trope is there. The classic trope is there. Something happens that changes who they are
Yep.
and they become something else.
Yep.
And that's what scares you. That's what scares you. And it doesn't have to be anything extravagant. It doesn't have to be anything otherworldly. It
Nope.
could literally be right next door. It could
Yep.
literally be right in your backyard.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, it messes with your mind.
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
watched The Babadook, and I loved The Babadook.
Oh my God.
Like, I was a fan of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
So
Like,
good.
Yep, that stuff, yeah, it was quite terrifying actually because like it's again, it's taking your humanity and messing with it in really horrible ways. Fun fact, the current work in progress that I have is demon possession and yeah, it messes with my character in horrible ways. So,
Awesome. Well, Pierre, I want to talk to you forever because we've become friends on TikTok, but we are about out of time.
we
Um,
are. I
yeah,
haven't been keeping track of the time.
I know. No, I have a timer going every time because otherwise I'd sit here for four
Oh, okay.
hours talking about stuff because
Yep, I
I
see.
love all
It's
you guys
almost an hour now. That's insane.
because we're
Wow.
all
We've been
nerds.
talking for an hour.
Yeah, it goes
We're
quick.
all nerds. Yeah, we are all nerds. Right, right.
Thanks to everyone for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you to Pierre for coming on to the show today. I really appreciate it. As always, it's been completely fascinating and has gone in genres that we've not even, I never know where a conversation is going to go.
It can go like everywhere. I know we can like have interviews like nonstop, honestly.
Oh, for sure.
It's always a pleasure. Always a
Oh,
pleasure. I was very, very happy to get on. Definitely could get on with, like other authors as well. So if you have any other opportunities where you can have more than just me,
oh yeah.
bring
No,
me on.
that's definitely in the
It's
works.
totally cool.
Well, thank you
It's
guys so
definitely in the
much.
works.
I hope you have a really good rest of your afternoon. Thank you guys for listening and tune in next week for our next author or narrator or reader. It's all a surprise. Have a great day, you guys.
Take care. Thank you.